Hi, my name is Ed Gonzalez, and I am reporting today on Chapter 7 of the book Originals, How Nonconformists Move the World. Chapter 7, Rethinking Groupthink, The Myths of Strong Culture, Cults, and Devil's Advocates, is something that I'm going to be discussing today with Jamila, Latrina, and two outside sources, Chris Lorenz and Duncan Garcia. They are friends of mine from the technology arena. I've worked with them over the last 20 years or so at Dell and at Rackspace, and we've all shared some form of exercise or experience within the groupthink space. In Chapter 7, Adam Grant mentions that groupthink is the tendency to seek consensus instead of fostering dissent. He mentions that groupthink's the enemy of originality and that people feel pressured to conform to the dominant default views instead of championing diversity of thought. This next animated clip is an introduction to groupthink to make sure that we're all on the same page as we move forward in this discussion.
It's just as agreeable when you know what's expected of you in a group and what the rules are. That makes life nice and clear. It's also easier if everyone thinks roughly the same. It prevents a lot of discussions and hassle. A commonly heard phrase is,
"This is simply the way we do things here."
Each group, no matter where in the world, has a number of rules, which everyone has more or less got to observe. In one group, it can be the norm you don't show your emotions. You approach things in a business-like way and work according to rules, procedures, and logical arguments. Thumping the table is seen as a loss of self-control and a sign of weakness. However, there are also groups where you can assert your position by showing your emotions. Your ideas are much better listened to. But no matter how different groups can be, one danger is always lurking. Namely, that group members are expected to conform to what the group as a whole thinks about something. You probably recognize this phenomenon. It's uncomfortable in a group to be the only one raising your hand and saying you see things differently. But if everyone in a group is required to agree with each other, then it can have some unpleasant consequences. It may be that such a group will refuse to see other points of view, and as it were become entrenched in its own correctness. We call that phenomenon groupthink. It's then more important for you to adapt to the norm than voice your opinion. And in fact, in that way the whole purpose of the group is undermined. After all, an important argument for cooperation is that an issue can be viewed from different angles. But it's exactly that principle which is undermined by groupthink. If a group has been reduced to groupthink, then anyone who has a different point of view is ignored or ridiculed. Independent thinking then stops, and the status quo is restored again. Groupthink has already led to many disasters. Just think about all the wrong decisions, large and small, about which was said afterwards. Did no one really see this coming? Why did no one point out the risks? Why didn't anyone intervene? People stood passively by, watched what was happening, and did nothing or exactly the wrong thing. That is groupthink. Groupthink is very difficult to break down. You think the group is on the right track because you are in complete agreement. Therefore, your conclusions must be correct.
Adam Grant spent a good chunk of the first part of the chapter talking about the Bay of Pigs and JFK's group exercise regarding the Bay of Pigs. And while he talks about Yale psychologist Irving Janis's research in groupthink, when a group becomes so cohesive that it creates a culture where people share the same values and norms that they believe in so intensely, Grant later claims that more recent research has led to the belief that cohesion wasn't the issue. So if cohesion wasn't the issue, what is?
Groupthink is probably the biggest problem I hear leaders complain about. It's the barrier to innovation. It leads to all kinds of bad decisions. It gets in the way of change. So every leader I work with wants to know, how do I get diversity of thought? And what most leaders do is they assign a devil's advocate. They say, look, if we've got a majority opinion, we need to get somebody who's going to argue for the opposite. Unfortunately, most of the time it doesn't work. Charlotte Nemeth at Berkeley has spent a few decades studying this, and what she finds is people aren't actually persuaded by devil's advocates most of the time. One, they don't argue forcefully enough because they don't really believe the position. It's like, all right, I'm going to play a role here. Check the box. Now I can go right back to the majority view. And then secondly, even if they do argue with passion and conviction, their audiences tend not to believe them because they know, yeah, that guy's just playing a role. So how do you get dissenting opinions? The answer from Nemeth is that we need to do a much better job not assigning devil's advocates, but unearthing them. So find somebody who genuinely holds a different opinion and invite them into the conversation. Right? Look for the person who's in the silent minority and ask them, what do you think? Go out of your way to figure out who has a contrarian view on the topic that you're debating, and ask that person to present the view and give them a chance to prepare for it. That ends up being a great way to fight groupthink.
These people were almost too smart. They've always been enormously successful, and I couldn't fathom how they could be such failures.
Well, that's the title of the book, The Brilliant Disaster, and it's ironic, of course, and it's oxymoronic, but the brilliant part is the men who did it.
Yeah.
They were the best and the brightest, and you know, a number of Rhodes Scholars. Dean Rush, the Secretary of State, had been a Rhodes Scholar. There were many Rhodes Scholars. There was George Bundy, who'd been the Dean of Arts and Sciences at Harvard at the age of 34. He was just, I think, 42 at the time. Robert McNamara, Secretary of Defense, had been the president of Ford Motor Company at the age of 40. All of these guys were really smart and really successful, and had never really failed at anything. And I do think you have to attribute part of what happened to the fact that when they got in a room together and they looked around at each other, they saw a lot of brilliant people who they respected, and they in themselves they saw people who did not fail, and they forgot about Murphy's Law. You know, things go wrong.
Yeah.
So I jokingly say it might have helped to have a few less brilliant people, regular people, you know, in presidential administrations, people like me, for instance. I'm available. People to point out that things don't always go the way you plan them, and that would have been a good thing for people to think
people
about.
who ask what are thought to be dumb questions.
Absolutely, yeah, that's the thing, and nobody wanted to embarrass themselves by asking those dumb questions.
Right, and that, I take it, is part of why you say that groupthink took over.
Yes, groupthink did. There were a number of factors, I think, that led to this bad decision. You have to forgive them a little bit because this did occur only 3 months into the beginning of the administration. And a lot of these, they were still finding their way to the men's room. I mean, they hadn't gotten their sea legs yet. And then they also they didn't want to embarrass themselves in front of the president, or in front of each other. But Groupthink is the famous book by Irving Janis, written in 1972, that was inspired by the Bay of Pigs. He was asking himself, how could it be that all these smart people could make such a bad decision? And he came up with a theory that when you get people with similar backgrounds into a room, there is an impetus to agree with each other. Nobody wants to stand out, particularly when, I mean, these guys really did come from, they had similar resumes. A lot of them had gone to East Coast boarding schools, Ivy League colleges. They knew each other socially. They had reason to agree with each other and to assume the other guy was right. And the one person, I mean, Irving Janis' book really refers to one meeting particularly that happened just over 10 days before the invasion, April 4th of 1961, when you had all these guys in a conference room in the State Department. And Kennedy goes around and asks them what they think, and they all vote for it. Now later they all say they had major reservations about it, but they didn't voice them at the time. The one guy who did voice reservations was an outsider. It was a senator who really shouldn't have been at that meeting, Senator William Fulbright. Right. Kennedy had invited him in knowing that he had problems with the plan. And he got up and gave this rousing speech about how this was a terrible idea, un-American, impractical, wrong in every respect. And he became the foil that everybody sort of ganged up on. And as Janis wrote, it really only confirmed what people believed. You know, when you have one person that you can say, oh, he's the outsider, those who already are prone to agree with each other, it sort of solidifies their belief in their own opinion.
How do we better advocate or better set up dialogue so that we disengage from that type of group consensus that is predicated upon self-censorship and illusory unanimity?
Well, I think, like he said in the video, everybody in the room was too like-minded, too unwilling to speak up except for one person, and Senator Fulbright wasn't even supposed to be in the room, and he was the only one that was speaking against it. And of course, they did not want to take his opinion. So I think it's important, especially in those sorts of settings, to make sure that there are people from different backgrounds and different areas, and people that don't have the background of agreeing with each other, make especially national decisions like that.
Should there have been more Fulbrights in that room?
I think so, yeah. And I think that he had the right idea, but it wasn't followed through, and it wasn't executed to the potential that it could have been.
The other thing I think is that this is a perfect example of making it stick. And sometimes we get people who, once they get to a certain stature or they get to a certain academic level, simplicity seems to go out the window. So even though in this perspective that this wasn't a simple task, if they would have just broke it down to its most simple task, it would not have been as much groupthink. We get too caught up in the nuances of things that we forget our goal. What is the goal? What is the very simple goal that we are trying to accomplish? And I think because, us forgetting the most simple part of a task is kind of sometimes our Achilles heel of being able to make command decisions or being able to make important decisions, that we just forget about the very simple, basic part of what it is that we're doing.
And then they didn't want to embarrass them.
You know, and there's no doubt that you guys are going to be leading discussions, conversations, brainstorming sessions in the future throughout your career. You've been involved with you know, groupthink before in many iterations. What or how do you plan to, I guess, move away from potential groupthink within your own discussions, within your own conversations? What are some tools or resources that you either use now or that you can look into bringing in?
I think the first thing is having a sense of awareness that it is a creep that will constantly come in anytime you have a meeting of, and the video touched a little bit on this too, right? People in the same career fields and the same backgrounds tend to generally fall in line on the on that. But I think number one, having a sense of awareness that it's not only a possibility but probably an inevitability that groupthink will creep into your brainstorming discussions. I think there's two things that you can do to kind of counter this. One, I'm going to go back to the example earlier about hiring, bringing somebody in from outside the organization. This would kind of be akin to the same type of thing, you know, in the JFK example, in having a dissenter from the outside. I don't know that I like necessarily saying I'm going to bring them in to just be a dissenter or be the devil's advocate, but definitely be somebody there, bringing somebody in, a third party that keeps you honest. It keeps your group honest. It keeps you out of going down that one rabbit hole and keeps you open to other things. It doesn't necessarily mean that they'll work against you, but I think having kind of this is where the value, I think, in when you're doing a brainstorming type session, I, as the leader of this organization, probably shouldn't be the one leading that brainstorming session. Realizing that I too could fall into that. I'm only human, right? I draw on my experiences from it, but I don't discount that something like that could happen. I think that's why you look at bringing in somebody, a moderator of sorts, to kind of MC or move all of this along. One, just to prevent, you know, they might be able to identify the discussion going more into a groupthink, you know, more going down the groupthink path of just, you know, honing in on one idea, but not necessarily exploring other ideas or other options before doing that, and kind of shepherding them or spearheading them back out into the middle for a bit. You know, and look, if everybody in the end feels that's still the same way they want to go, that's a discussion for another time. But I think, again, honing in on an idea and instantly committing to it and the team just kind of falling in line with that is, obviously you're doing that at the expense of potentially other great ideas that could be even better. And I think if you have that third-party outsider, again, I don't like the word dissenter or devil's advocate, but somebody to kind of keep you honest, right? And, you know, the term just keep you honest, but just to kind of challenge you and make sure that before you decide you're going to steer yourself and your group down this particular path, you've explored the other ways to go first to make sure it truly is the right way to go.
So I think you've hit on a pretty good, I guess, concept or tool, and that is the use of a third party, right? So somebody who is objective and doesn't have an immediate bias towards a specific solution.
And I would also add to that, somebody who's not really, they're invested in engagement in the brainstorming facilitating the brainstorming session and making sure everyone's engaged, but they're not invested in any of the outcomes, regardless.
Right.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, and that's important, right? Because, you know, as a leader, and we've all been in those situations, trying to get to a solution. We definitely have, we're human, and we have bias, and it's the bias that usually shoots us in the foot when we get a bunch of people who are singing your praises when you've got specific ideas out in front of you, and you want somebody to push the group. You want somebody to provide alternative ideas. You want somebody to bring to the group a different way of thinking, right? So definitely a third party facilitator is good.
We set up a hidden camera experiment to see if this woman would stand up at the sound of this tone, simply because everyone else is. You might be thinking you'd never go along with this, or would you? After just 3 beats, and without knowing why she's doing it, this woman is now conforming perfectly to the group. But what happens if we take the group away?
Elaine, please.
Okay, now she's alone. The crowd is gone, and nobody is watching her, except our hidden cameras. What do you think she'll do? She's now conforming to the rules of the group without them even being there. Now, watch what happens when we introduce another outsider who doesn't know the rules.
Have a seat and they'll be out in just a couple minutes. Thanks so much.
Everybody was doing it, so I thought I was supposed to.
Think she'll teach the new guy what to do? We kept the cameras rolling as more unsuspecting patients arrived. And slowly but surely, what began as a random rule for this woman has now become the social norm for everyone in this waiting room. Here to explain what's going on in their brains is Jonah Berger of the University of Pennsylvania.
This sort of internalized form of herd behavior is part of what we call social learning. Starting at a very early age, when we see members of our group perform a task, our brains literally reward us for following in their footsteps.
When I saw everybody stand up, I felt like I needed to join them. Otherwise, I'm like excluded. Once I decided to go with it, then I felt much more comfortable.
Conformity is how we become socialized, but it can also cause us to develop bad habits or repeat past wrongs.
And it's why even this rebel, who wasn't standing for any of this nonsense, eventually joined the ranks. And the only thing more shocking than seeing how easily conformity affects the way you act is that similar forces are subconsciously shaping the way you think right now.
When we started talking about groupthink, specifically around this topic or this category within the book, it really got me to thinking about that herd mentality,
yeah,
right? That's associated with those those small alignments to groupthink, right? As everybody's doing it, should I be doing it too? And if I'm not doing it, am I the outlier? And is it okay to be an outlier? Is it okay to not do what the group is doing? And one of the things that Adam does talk about in the group is the idea of nonconformity, right? An original is a nonconformist, and specifically a nonconformist who drives creativity and change. And in that example of that lobby experiment, there wasn't any dissent to the overall I guess experiment, right? Nobody decided to say I'm going to stop this, or this is, there wasn't any question. Well, there was that one gentleman who questioned, why are you doing this? Well, everybody else has been doing it, so I'm doing it as well. So, and that seems to be a big factor in groupthink as well. So, what are your thoughts on the video?
For me, the guy who asked the question was interesting because he was like, this is weird, and he asked the question, and he didn't even get like an answer that would like make it seem like something he should be doing. Right. His answer that he got was, well, everybody else did it, so I'm doing it too. And so then he started doing it. So it was like, I'm questioning what's happening, and I don't have a good reason to do this thing, but I'm going to do it anyway.
How do you think that we as participants in conversations and dialogues, when it comes to solutioning or ideating or creating, how can we become the individuals who don't add to groupthink? What are those things that we can do to ensure that we don't fall in the pit of groupthink?
Well, I think for me, what I saw from there is that as a newcomer coming into a situation, you kind of conform to however everybody else is. And I think that's also just how you learn culture and society. But for a situation where you're looking for somebody to dissent or somebody to give their opinion, I think you have to be comfortable around the people that you're with and willing to speak up. And these people were coming into the lobby into an already established situation, so they weren't comfortable questioning what was going on, but instead they were conforming to what everybody else was doing. So I think that it's important that in a situation that everybody feels comfortable in speaking their mind and speaking up.
Right.
I agree. I also think that not only do you have to be comfortable in the situation, but you have to be comfortable in yourself and your own thoughts and what you believe, and and know that it's okay for you to have a difference of opinion and for you to speak those opinions to a certain extent. But definitely being able to be confident in your thought process and making sure that whatever it is, that is just not shooting from the hip, for lack of a better term, that you're able to then be the outlier and know that it's okay to be the outlier.
Sure, absolutely. I think that's something that we're less accustomed to these days, is being comfortable being the outlier.
Yeah.
Right? We definitely want group consensus. We definitely want others to think that we're team players, because that's what we've been told, right? We need you to be a team player, but sometimes, especially in these situations, a team player should be an individual who's able to question, whether or not we're pursuing the right thing in the right way, right? Just don't be the aggressive outlier. Be somebody that's challenging but collaborative. So yeah, it's an interesting, funny story about
That's hilarious.
But it also touches on groupthink. There were many opportunities for her and each of the new individuals to say, wait, nobody's telling us that we have to do this. Nobody's. You said you were doing it because everybody was doing it before, but as leaders, we have an opportunity to address culture. How can you help design or build a culture around nonconformity?
I think through consistent and persistent messaging, not just in words but in actions, to encourage open dialogue and dissension.
We should probably be careful too when we say dissension. We're not talking about aggressive. We're not talking about aggressive, combative.
No, absolutely not. You won't be able to run a successful business without that, or have a successful culture. I guess there's the old saying, actions speak louder than words, right? I think as a leader, demonstrating the action of allowing deferring opinions to not only my own but others in a constructive manner is something. I think that takes time though too. I don't think that's something, and I'm going to fall back just on my personal experience. I've moved in my career over teams that I didn't build. I replace a manager, and I may not have even been the team's pick to replace that manager, in the interview process. And when I come in, the last team I came in on and replaced an existing leader on, when that leader had moved on to a new role, my first probably 6 to 8 months were pretty tough, and it was mainly the team adjusting to me adjusting to the team, getting to know them, not just as individuals, not just as professionals, but to an extent as an individual, to find out what drives them, what motivates them, where do they want to go in their career, and that sort of thing, and encouraging dialogue, be it in a one-on-one session or in an open meeting session. Now, one thing I will say from our early days at the Rack that I loved, and it's something I've really tried to instill and take with me in every role I've been in, is I think you should be allowed to say what's on your mind, but you also have to understand, coming back to being a professional, I've said my piece. If I'm still shot down, I'm allowed. Then I still, as part of that kind of social behavior, for lack of a better term, need to go with it. I think in a case, coming back to your question, Ed, and doing that, I want everybody to be able to speak their mind. What I don't want them to do is have a combative, thing. And if it's something that might be a little sensitive, or it might be something that, might cross where it's like, hey, I may have to drop some F-bombs in here. I just don't know. I'm so frustrated with the direction we're going in or whatever. I think then at that point, let's take it off the floor, and I'll be happy to be a soundboard for that, and just, let me hear the ideas, let me hear what's going on. But I think that takes time, and I think as a leader, it's really important to foster that. Both as an individual contributor in my career and as a leader, having the ability, knowing that I have the ability to speak my mind to somebody, or I'm allowing folks to speak their mind to me, gives me as a leader a better idea of what I'm managing and what I'm dealing with. If I'm only seeing the problem through rose-colored glasses, that's all I'm ever going to know, right? So if I'm hearing the ugly truth, I'd rather hear that and understand and have a sense of honesty around what I'm dealing with. And as an individual contributor, if I'm able to speak my mind, I feel heard, I feel valued. And if I'm not allowed to say what's on my mind and my ideas, regardless of how crazy they are, then, again, I don't feel like my value or my contributions to the team are going to be valued. And that might cause me to question, is this the right area or fit for me, or should I take my talent elsewhere?
And we didn't get to you, Duncan. I wanted to touch on, get your perspective as well, regarding, what measures you can take as a leader to encourage a culture of nonconformity. Is that even possible? Do we want it as leaders? Do we want those dissenting opinions? How do we want them? How frequent do we want them? What kind of culture needs to exist in order to have that type of communication?
First off, I think you can't. I think we're conformists as human beings. We like conforming to a group, even if that group is revolutionary. If we're like-minded in that pursuit, we conform. So the question is, what can we do as leaders to disrupt that? You strategically place disruptors throughout your business in key roles, and make sure that they're enabled and empowered to dissent for that group or for that line of business, or whatever the unit is that you're trying to kind of get through. I think as long as you have those people asking those questions in an environment where that pursuit is appreciated and encouraged, I think that's the best that you can do.
I completely agree with the fact of putting in key places certain disruptors. Right? The idea of having a disruptor within a group who is a constructive disruptor. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So somebody who is going to manifest constructive ideas with engaging conversations, so that I also feel my value, and it adds to the inspiring mission. Right.
Well, what's the first thing that we go to when we get pushback on something, especially in our line of work? Oh, this person, persona A is being lazy. They don't want to do the work, or we're asking somebody to do something, and nobody wants to take more on. Well, that's our jobs, first off. But set that to the side. If that's your thought, it's already broken down, because now you've entered into a situation where you don't trust the person that you're having a conversation with. So you have to work around that as well, I think is the point I'm trying to make here.
I love the ideas that you guys have presented in helping identify different tactics, different measures to help create a culture around communication, better communication, right? But I do want to, this is on my bookshelf, and I talked about it earlier, but Principles, it's backwards probably to y'all.
No, it's right.
Yeah. Okay. By Ray Dalio. Take a look at it. I think you guys would definitely enjoy it. There are three aspects of the principles that he employs, and he breaks them down into specific groups. And the first one are the principles that help get the culture right within the business. The next one is to help get the people right, to help get the right people, and then to build and evolve your machine, right? So he's got three categories, and within each one, he's got various principles by which the entire organization is evangelic. Everybody is preaching, everybody is talking, everybody is speaking. The idea of these principles. But one of the things that I like about it is that it also talks about the potential. I'm just using this phrase over because it's part of the chapter on groupthink of the dissenting participant, right? Somebody who doesn't necessarily agree. Who can start a conversation, a dialogue, to create something that's more meaningful or to set the record straight, right? And it's a good book. You should take a look at it. It's an awesome if you haven't already. I wanted to take the time to thank my guests, Jamila, Latrina, Chris, and Duncan, for participating in this conversation on Groupthink from Adam Grant's book Originals. It's not every day that we get the opportunity to dig as deep as we did, and I definitely loved the back and forth that we had. There was a ton of footage. And we could talk about this for some time, but I'm going to leave you with a quote from Seneca on Groupthink. For it is dangerous to attach oneself to the crowd in front, and so long as each one of us is more willing to trust another than to judge himself, we never show any judgment in the matter of living, but always a blind trust in a mistake that has been passed on from hand to hand finally involves us and works our destruction. It is the example of other people that is our undoing. Let us merely separate ourselves from the crowd, and we shall be made whole. But as it is, the populace, defending its own iniquity, pits itself against reason. And so we see the same thing happening that happens at the elections, where, when the fickle breeze of popular favor has shifted, the very same persons who chose the praetors wonder that those praetors were chosen. Take care, and happy holidays.